Many might argue that Gary Larson was a veritable genius and manifested such daily in the comic pages across the country. The Far Side cartoons are ever etched in my mind. In fact, during this time of quarantine, as I finished reading a book after a book after a book, I took to looking back to old collections in a book of Far Side cartoons. And one of them really stood out to me. It showed two college professors looking at a blackboard with some involved formula scrawled all over it. And one of them turns to the other while pointing at the board and says, "Yes, yes, I know that, Sidney. Everyone knows that. But look, 4 wrongs squared minus 2 wrongs to the 4th power divided by this formula do make a right." And I thought that was great. And it got me triggered back to thinking of something that was from Dostoevsky. When dealing with a man, it is more accurate to say 2 plus 2 is oft times 5. Because man doesn't act in logical fashion. Well, we know that to be true. Truly, man does not act in logical fashion. He would also go on to note, man everywhere and always, whoever he may be, has preferred to act as he wished and not in the least as his reason and advantage has dictated. In other words, he's spot on as Larson was spot on. That what mankind tries to do is have two wrongs, make a right. Mankind will try and justify whatever he so desires. But no matter how hard one may argue, no matter how hard one may strive and assert that the end justifies the means, there is no logic or credence that will hold water to that rationale. In Peter's letter, in Paul's letter to the brethren in Rome, he addressed this issue to some degree. And what their mindset was they thought that they had to sin the more in order to afford God the opportunity to extend greater and greater grace. So they thought they were doing a favor for God by sinning the more. Well, Paul writes in the 6th chapter of Romans, verse 1, "What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace might increase? May it never be. How shall we who died to sin still live in it?" Good question. But that was the rationale of the Romans. And Paul goes, no. You missed the point. Back in the book of Isaiah in the 5th chapter and verse 20. "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." There's no way that 2 wrongs make a right. It just can't be. But it seems that equation that man has sought to present for a long, long time is what he wants. Again, looking back to Paul, in the 7th chapter of Romans, in verses 9 down through 25, Paul sets forth the subjective conflict that exists between good and evil, and that never will the twain meet. There's no way you can say that evil is good and good is evil, because 2 wrongs don't make a right. With a definite answer being found, which is mankind does have a set standard between right and wrong. It is a standard that has been put in place by the God of heaven. And I didn't like mathematics going to school. I hated it. Whether it be algebra or geometry or whatever. I just did it to get by. I did not like it. But eventually I realized, that here is the formula. You follow the formula and you will come out with the right answer. Guaranteed every time, if you follow the formula. And so with that simple thought in mind, eventually, after getting out of college and getting on with life and so on, I was even able to start tutoring some kids. And they were struggling with math. And I go, look, here's the formula. It's easy, follow it. You'll get the right answer. And if only man would take and apply that to all things. because no way can you figure out in any conceivable fashion that two wrongs are going to make a right. Consider this, which is seen by Paul, or written by Paul in Romans 12th chapter, verse 21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. We all make mistakes. Throughout this little talk, I've made several. And I could say intentionally, well, I did it there so people would know, you got to look for mistakes and realize we're all human. No, we don't need to resort to that kind of sophistry. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to make slips. But we can't try to justify that by overlooking or by saying, well, this and this and this equals, it's going to be all right. And that's kind of what Joseph Fletcher did in the book Situation Ethics. And I realize that's a very old book. But situational ethics even translates down to us today. Values clarification, things of that nature. But when situation ethics came out, Fletcher brought out the following and basically stated, it doesn't matter about rights or wrongs. It is only a matter of circumstances which then justifies the situation. Consider this quote. Circumstances alter cases. It's found on page 36. On page 84, you find the following. Every man must decide for himself what is right. Any act, even lying, abortion, premarital sex, adultery, and murder, could be right depending on the circumstances. Now, you want to talk about convoluted logic? It's right there. None of those things would I agree with as ever being right. Ever. And again, people say, well, quantitatively, how can you say ever? Well, in the context that he's bringing it out and in the argumentation that he's offering and others offer, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In the final analysis, it really doesn't matter how much mankind tries to argue and rationalize about what is right and wrong. In Jeremiah 10 and verse 23, Jeremiah writes, I know, O Lord, that a man's way is not in himself, nor is it in a man who walks to direct his own steps. That's what man wants to do. It's not within us to do that. Moreover, mankind's concern should be directed at being found in the favor of the God of heaven. He has set forth the formula, and there is no way to twist it, bend it, or contort it to get it to the answer that two wrongs make a right or any variation thereof. I mentioned about my challenges in mathematics. I don't care how much I argued with Mr. Wedgwood. He goes, no, that's not the answer. And I could find the answer because the answers were in the back of the book. And so I said, well, if that's all you really want, I'll just put those in. And he goes, no, what I want to see is I want to see your work, how you got to that answer. Well, that's what God wants with us in our life. He wants to see it in what we do and what we're about. He wants to be able to see that we understand the concepts, that we put them into practice, and realize that there is no variation with the concepts of two wrongs making a right, or any variation thereof. Solomon writes in the 12th chapter of Ecclesiastes, the conclusion when all has been heard is, fear God, keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. Because God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or whether it is evil.